When we think of the most powerful women in history, names like Cleopatra, Elizabeth I, Catherine the Great come to mind. But their power pales in comparison to that of the subject of today's video. Wu Zetian was an empress who ruled like a god over her people. Wu Zetian began her life as a low-ranking concubine in the court of Emperor Taizong of China. He was the second emperor of the famed Tang dynasty and had a harem of nearly 700 women. Wu Zetian wasn't even born into nobility and actually entered the imperial palace as a slave. But she had designs on the throne, and in those days, it was a case of either being born into power or sleeping your way there. Taizong was at the end of his life when Wu Zetian entered the picture, so she knew her window to climb the ranks was closing fast. As a young woman, Wu Zetian was remarkably intelligent, sharp-witted, and ambitious. She also understood the art of manipulating men to get what she wanted. Soon enough, her intellect caught the eye of the emperor, and he selected her to join his inner circle of concubines. It didn't take long for her to catch his eye. The emperor was old and ailing, and she used her feminine wiles to seduce him. As he slowly neared his mortal end, Wu Zetian used every trick in the book to ingratiate herself to him, and it worked like a charm. Upon his death, Wu Zetian was summoned to the new emperor, Gaozong, Taizong's son, with whom she slept her way to the top once again. Now, before too long, she had secured the position of Empress, all because of her ability to manipulate men. It's been described as the greatest example of a woman seducing her way to power in all of human history. But her rise to the throne wasn't without controversy. At court, Wu Zetian had a chief rival, the emperor's biological wife, Empress Wang. She was a kind, generous, and pious woman, the polar opposite of Wu Zetian. However, this also made her naive and weak. In the treacherous world of imperial politics, the two women clashed over influence and power. Wu Zetian hated her rival and couldn't wait to see her gone. So to eliminate her competition, Wu Zetian played a trick worthy of Lady Macbeth. Legends say she orchestrated a tragedy to befall the Empress. One night, fire broke out in the palace, killing 3 of the emperor's sons along with the Empress and her mother. Blame was immediately put on the queen for failing to protect the imperial children. Wu Zetian was quick to capitalize on this and reminded the grieving emperor of his deceased wife's shortcomings. That was exactly what he needed to hear. Consumed with grief, he ordered the execution of several courtiers whom he believed had failed him that night, but refused to punish Wu Zetian. That move alone proved her innocence in the eyes of the emperor, and she further convinced him that she was a good and loyal subject. This set her up perfectly for the throne. Soon, Wu Zetian got the power she always wanted. It didn't happen right away, however. For 13 years, she stayed by the side of the ailing emperor, caring for him and giving him comfort. This was no doubt a difficult task considering the fact that Wu Zetian despised the man and saw him as nothing more than a pawn in her game. When Gaozong finally kicked the bucket, Wu Zetian wasted no time in seizing the throne. She immediately issued an edict that declared her Empress Dowager, effectively stripping the late emperor's widow of her title as Empress. Then she set about purging Gaozong's court of everyone she saw as a threat to her authority, and her list of enemies was long. Her first target was her own father, who had sired her from a previous relationship with the Emperor Taizong. She accused him of improper conduct and had him put to death. Her own mother was next. Though long dead, Wu Zishan had her exhumed, executed, and then tossed into a mass grave. Her brothers were put to death for crimes against the state, and her uncle was forced to kill himself. You get the point. No one was safe from Wu Zishan's wrath. It's said that she kept a notorious network of secret police who reported directly to her. "If you survive, my spies will kill you," she famously told her enemies. These men carried out their duties diligently and with extreme prejudice. They would use psychological pressure, torture, and even murder to extract confessions from their victims. In the eyes of the law, you were innocent until proven guilty. But in Wu Zishan's court, things were reversed. You were guilty until proven innocent. If the secret police suspected you of disloyalty, you had better cooperate, or else you would find yourself in a body bag soon. This created a climate of fear among the elite as no one ever knew when they might become the target of her purges. Officials watched each other warily, and many turned on their colleagues just to stay alive. Even the emperor's grandmother was not spared. Wu Zishan banished her to a remote village where she spent her remaining days as a lowly farmer. Some legends say that Wu Zishan fed her enemies to packs of wild animals. But this is likely a metaphor to describe her ruthless nature rather than a literal historical fact. We do know, however, that she enjoyed punishing people in gruesome ways, and many of her punishments were carried out in public to send a message to the rest of the court. She chopped off the hands of thieves and hung them from trees. She sentenced rebels to death by 1,000 cuts. That means the condemned was cut into pieces over a period of several hours. Convicted traitors were sewn up in leather sacks along with rocks and then thrown into rivers. There's also the case of the rebel Yang Kaoning. She led an army of over 100,000 men against the Empress. But when her forces were defeated, Wu Zishan dragged her through the streets of the capital while she pulled a banner that read, "Whoever dares to betray me shall be dealt with like this." After humiliating her in public, Wu Zishan chopped her head off. By all accounts, the court of Wu Zishan was a living hell, a place of intrigue, deception, and bloodshed. Those were the best years of her life. However, the crowning achievement of her reign came in 690 when she did the unthinkable. She usurped the Tang dynasty and declared her own Zhou dynasty. This made her the only female emperor in China's history. To legitimize her rule, she went to great lengths to forge texts and prophecies that predicted her rise to power. She also commissioned the construction of temples and erected statues of herself as a goddess to deify her image, despite the divine mandate now being in her favor. Wu Zishan continued to purge those who opposed her, killing anyone who dared defy her. Her reign wasn't all bad, however. Like her father, Wu Zishan was a great administrator. She reformed the civil service and promoted officials based on merit rather than birth. She supported talented scholars and made efforts to stabilize the empire. In fact, her reign marked a cultural flourishing known as the Kaiyuan era. She built roads and canals, encouraged trade, and standardized weights and measures. Her regime also experienced great flowering of poetry, sculpture, and painting. Wu Zixin was a great patron of the arts, and many artists flourished under her rule. But her greatest achievement was shattering the mold and proving that a woman could rule just as well as a man, maybe even better. During her 15-year reign, she successfully navigated the treacherous waters of imperial politics and established her dynasty. As a major player in Eurasian geopolitics, she brought the nomadic tribes to heel and expanded the borders of her empire. However, despite her intelligence and ability to wield power, Wu Zixin was consumed by fear. She lived in constant dread of being overthrown, and it's thought that this fear caused her to be paranoid and abusive. Many of her own sons lived in fear of being disowned or executed, and no one was safe from her vicious coterie of secret police. Historians debate her legacy. Some view her as a visionary ruler who saved the Tang dynasty from decline and brought peace and prosperity to her people. Others believe that she was a tyrannical despot who resorted to terror and bloodshed to maintain her power. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. One thing is for sure, though. Her reign was a study in contradictions. On the one hand, it was a time of political stability and cultural achievement. On the other hand, it was also a period of unprecedented cruelty and paranoia. In the end, Wu Zixin was a product of her times. She was a woman who lived in a man's world, and she played the game of imperial politics better than anyone else. But the price of her success was high. Those around her suffered greatly from her paranoia and abuse of power, but none more so than Wu Zixin herself. The fear of losing everything she had gained drove her to become the very thing she had once rebelled against: a ruthless, uncaring tyrant. After her death in 705 AD, her enemies and political opponents wrote much of her history. They exaggerated her cruelty as a form of political propaganda to discredit her. But the truth of the matter is that Wu Zixin was a woman who was ahead of her time, a brilliant strategist and administrator who just happened to be female. Wu Zixin, she was a trailblazer who showed the world that women could hold and wield absolute power in a deeply patriarchal society. And for that, we should remember her.